Augustus Roe has written a book about the martial arts of Vietnam, and I'm talking to him now. Augustus, how are you doing?
Yeah, great, thank you.
Oh, great. And you're in Vietnam now?
Yeah, so I'm actually I live just outside Hanoi, so just outside the capital of Vietnam.
Okay, and we tried this once before, but the internet connection let us down. So fingers crossed this time the
Yeah,
internet connection is good. So let's get straight down to it. I mean, the book is a kind of, as a picture of it behind me there, that it's a kind
yeah,
of a survey of like as many martial arts in Vietnam as you could find, right? Is that basically the structure of the book?
yeah, pretty much. Well, it covers kind of like the major lineages of Vietnamese martial arts. I mean,
Okay.
much like Chinese or Japanese arts, there's kind of thousands of family styles and like lesser known variations. But
Mhm.
yeah, this book kind of details the major sects and the major
Right.
schools.
So how did you, tell us a little bit about the process. I mean, how long have you been in Vietnam? Did the martial arts bring you there? I mean, what's your relationship with them and how did you get into it?
Sure. So I from the UK, and I used to study martial arts in the UK. I did some Taekwondo, Wing Chun, some boxing, and some other bits and pieces. And I went traveling about 10 years ago, and I spent some time going. I traveled from North to South Japan, and then I went over to Korea and traveled from the bottom of Korea up to Seoul, and
Mm-hmm.
then was kind of at a loss of things to do. So I went to visit a friend of mine who was teaching in Vietnam. He knew I had an interest in martial arts, so he introduced me to a martial arts instructor who was teaching him at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I found it really interesting, especially like learning about some styles that I didn't know existed before then. And yeah, kind of fell in love with the country, fell in love with the weather, the food, everything really, and just ended
Okay.
up staying here.
Okay. So do you have a favorite Vietnamese style that you practice the most or that you've stuck with? What would you say is your favorite one?
Sure. So the style of martial arts, my main style of martial arts, is my favorite. It's from the Seven Mountains region in the southwest of Vietnam, and
Mm-hmm.
that's situated along the Vietnamese-Cambodian border.
Mm-hmm.
And it's for hundreds of years has been kind of a disputed area which has gone back between Vietnam, Cambodia, French even, and some Thai, yeah, ruling under different factions.
Mm-hmm.
And so the martial arts there are kind of a blend of like Chinese, Vietnamese styles with some influence from Cambodian and Cham peoples.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of an interesting amalgamation of different peoples and history.
Okay. So what's the status of indigenous martial arts? I mean, if you go into a big city, I guess you might find karate, kung fu, taekwondo, you might find Brazilian jiu-jitsu nowadays. How central or how prominent are indigenous Vietnamese martial arts in cities, in culture?
Yeah, sure. So visiting Vietnam, well, like you said, there's a large presence of martial arts like karate, wushu, BJJ, MMA. But the Vietnamese martial arts still are really popular, mainly seen as like a cultural piece. So I
Mhm.
mean, there are lots of performances in like kind of festivals and events, and it's still kind of quite heavily used or quite heavily emphasized as like a patriotic practice.
Okay.
So I mean, it's yeah,
Do they,
common in schools, universities, mainly with younger students.
okay. And do they claim ancient lineages, or do they have a more kind of complex narrative than that? Were they all invented on a mountaintop, or what's their
Yeah.
relationship with history?
Okay. Well, historically, there's quite a lot of research that's been done by kind of Vietnamese scholars. A lot of it is heavily emphasizes a kind of ancient history that some might argue is imagined
Hmm.
or or emphasized
Yeah.
rather. But I mean, historically, like the region has been kind of melting pot of different cultures and different customs that have all kind of come and gone over the years. So I mean, to say anything is truly Vietnamese is kind of an oxymoron, but I mean, there's definitely a strong culture of martial arts that have got a very long history, at least kind of 1,000 years or more. There's practices of like wrestling and spear and sword fighting that are distinctly different from like Chinese martial arts or other Southeast Asian styles.
Okay, so they look and feel unique. I mean, could you give us an example of some way that you might see a big difference between something we might recognize from the most well-known styles in the world?
Sure. So like some of the, well, a lot of it is based on kind of the terrain of the country. So in the north of the country, it's very mountainous. So you've got styles of martial arts include a lot of kind of hopping, jumping, going from very small positions to very wide open positions, which would be useful in kind of forested and mountain terrains. There are styles that utilize like kind of implements like machetes and crossbows that come from like the people in the northern mountains. Other examples include, for example, in the style I do, which comes from the southwest, it's very, very hot and very humid. So a lot of like the grabbing is done without actually gripping with the fingers. It's done kind of about like locking certain joints to avoid having to grab onto like a sweaty opponent. Okay. So
you get the regional sorts of flavors. Okay. And how many of because the book it's structured by, it introduces the different styles. It talks about the history of Vietnam, and it's structured by a kind of like pros and cons and unique flavors of each art, isn't it? So how many of them did you actually sample? I mean, and what was the length of time that you sampled them?
Sure. Well, I actually first started looking at the different Vietnamese martial arts, working on a TV show, which was going to go and kind of visit some of the other schools. And in doing that that took a couple of months, but in doing that and visiting some of the schools, then I developed more of an interest and wanted to go and learn more for myself. And so it took probably the best part of about 3 or 4 years with me using kind of holidays and break times, visiting different regions of the country and contacting different people. So a good few years spent traveling and
I heard that you were a bit of a celebrity in Vietnam. Is that the case, or is that an overstatement, or what's your position in Vietnamese media then? What do you do?
I'm kind of relatively known among the martial arts circle. I have quite a few like TV appearances and things, but I think culturally it's a bit of a novelty having a foreigner who's spent a long time living in Vietnam, who can speak Vietnamese to a reasonable level and teaches Vietnamese people Vietnamese martial arts. So it's kind of a
you're a novelty. You're a novelty. Okay, I get it. I get the structure. So I mean, how did you get into that? How did you end up being asked to be in a television program? Was it because of your linguistic and martial skills, and they thought, well, this guy's kind of looks good in front of a camera, or was that simple as it was, or how did it happen?
Actually, it was through a friend of mine who was working on a TV show, or who worked on a lot of documentaries. I said, look, I'm really interested in martial arts. I just read an article about a type of Vietnamese wrestling, and they have this wrestling festival every 2 years. These different kind of wrestling villages all meet, and they have like a 3 or 4 day tournament. And so I asked them if they're interested, and they loved the idea. They jumped on board and like, right, let's go and make a movie. Let's go and see some other styles as well.
Okay, so it was, I guess, I mean, so what year was this? I mean, was this quite recently, or how long ago was this?
No, this was about 2015.
Okay, interesting. Because there was this period of time from the sort of after the birth of reality television, you started to see these kind of travel documentaries where you get like 2 American dudes go around the world and sample the martial arts and stuff like that, and then fight each other. Was it that kind of thing? Was it like, this format works, let's do one where we get the white guy to go and go, these martial arts are really great? Was that the sort of structure of it?
I think it was a little like that, but I mean, it had a bit more of a focus on kind of exploring the culture rather than like just the combative side of things.
Okay.
And so I think they found it really interesting.
So you presented. So you're the presenter, you're the presenter of it?
I presented bits and pieces, but there's also a narrator who was kind of dubbing.
Okay. And so since then, have you done more martial arts documentaries or more appearances on television?
I've done a lot of like kind of TV appearances where it's interviews and kind of documenting when I teach or when I study martial arts.
Yeah.
And but I mean, really, it's just mainly for the interest of the general public. So it's not necessarily aimed at a martial arts literate group of the population, but yeah.
So you're like the Steven Seagal of Vietnam. You've opened your own. Okay, what about, I mean, the effects of, say, of the Vietnam War and the last sections of the 20th century and 21st century? There must have been a lot of cultural trauma. There must have been a certain amount of cultural loss and reconstruction. How would you say that's played out in the martial arts?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the modern styles of martial arts are very have kind of been developed with the ideals of building like a Vietnamese national identity, being subsidized by the government and trying to build kind of patriotic feelings and national styles, much like judo or kung fu.
Yeah, so part of a kind of post-war reconstruction and an affirmation of Vietnamese cultural identity. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly.
And so, do you think that's exclusively post-Vietnam War, or did it exist before the Vietnam War as a project?
That's been something that's kind of ongoing since the times of the battles going up to the end of the French colonial period, so 1954. So some kind of ideas of using martial arts as developing like national styles of martial arts for the Vietnamese people to rebel against the.
And do you see any French influence? I mean, I was talking to a French professor recently, and the episode will be out before this episode, called Jean-François Luce, and he has looked at French styles like savate, la boxe française, and he said that the connection between like savate and its influence in institutions in Okinawa was quite huge. So I guess in a place that was colonially French for a long time, did you see any savate or anything like that, like high kicking styles? Is that present in the features of the kind of martial arts that we see in Vietnam?
Sure. Well, I can't say with any certainty whether they've borrowed directly. However, for example, in Ho Chi Minh City, formerly Saigon, during the post-colonial period, there was a big audience for kind of like combat sports fighting styles, which may well have had some influence from kind of from the French or from savate or other Western boxing. There are also a number of styles that utilize items like umbrellas and canes, which I know are familiar with, like cane de combat, the French cane fighting styles.
Okay.
So I mean, I think undeniably there's influence there.
And
what
I guess
exactly it is can be discussed, but
yeah. And like, what's the status of arts that come from maybe like rivaling countries, that bordering countries, or countries that Vietnam might not be a political or cultural ally with? I mean, are martial arts from those countries reviled or marginalized, or what's the status of that situation?
Actually, that's kind of one of the reasons why I enjoy living in Vietnam so much, is that for for a country that's been kind of at war for the best part of the last century, they're incredibly open. Foreign styles of martial arts are really popular. It doesn't matter where they're from. I mean, one of the most recent kind of post World War II events has been fighting with Japanese and judo, karate. A lot of Japanese martial arts are really popular. Yeah, the same with kind of Thai martial arts, Chinese martial arts. I mean, generally, I find people in Vietnam are really open to foreign influence. And I think that might be a result of having been kind of closed off for such a long time.
Okay. And what are the status of martial arts in culture generally? Because I mean, for instance, we know the status of martial arts in the West. It's like there's something foreign. They're either combat sports, which are gaining normal status now recently, or they're something East Asian that we see in Hollywood films and that children and weirdos like us do. I mean, what's the status of martial arts within Vietnamese culture and society? Are they trivial, or are they serious, or how do people regard them?
Yeah, well, there's kind of similar divides here, really. I mean, there are among like the Vietnamese population, there's kind of one group who see the traditional martial arts as being kind of traditional archaic practices that are more closely tied with kind of religion or festival performance.
Okay.
Like things like the lion dances, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the other side who identify their martial arts as being a kind of a symbol of the ancient warrior spirits, and they persevere and believe a lot of traditional martial arts are still incredibly effective. I mean, there is kind of a significant divide there, particularly with the younger generation.
Do the are there specific features to Vietnamese combat sports? So if you have a full contact or limited rules kind of a competition in Vietnam, would it just look like MMA, or do they have specific forms of combat that look different to that?
Sure. There are. It's quite recent that a lot of combat sport competitions have actually been allowed.
Right.
There was a ongoing ban for a long time due to kind of association with gambling, which was something that the Vietnamese government tried hard to stamp out. Okay. In recent years, there's been kind of it's been loosened up, so actually now they're allowed full contact kind of competitive combat sports. Mm-hmm. The Vietnamese martial arts themselves have always had this kind of element of full contact fighting. Mm-hmm. It's probably closer to something like Sanda, like Chinese kickboxing in terms of rule sets. Mm-hmm. Okay. But there are definitely like kind of features that make them uniquely Vietnamese. So if you were to watch like a Vietnamese combat sport versus like the Chinese equivalent, you can notice some features that do come in a lot of the general styles of martial arts. A lot of it is kind of focuses on low striking, a lot of sweeps, a lot of like leg takedowns. Mm-hmm. I'm sure for anyone who knows about Vietnam, you've probably seen like the flying scissor takedowns where they use their legs to switch to take down the opponent. Okay.
And is there much in the way of a Vietnamese film industry? I mean, are there Vietnamese martial arts films that we might be able to find with subtitles somewhere, or where would we look for them?
Yeah, sure. There's a very famous Vietnamese martial artist, Johnny Chi Nguyen, who's lives in the US, and he's had quite a lot of serious martial arts films. The good title is The Rebel. That's kind of set in Saigon in the colonial period. There's also a new film which is out on Netflix called Fury, which is not necessarily martial arts, but it's kind of about a Vietnamese woman who goes to get back her trafficked daughter, and she's kind of a very dangerous lady. Um, in Vietnam, there is quite a strong correspondence with traditional martial arts and film, but just not a lot of it is available to the outside world, really.
Okay, so if you think about if you think about films like Ong Bak, which champions Muay Thai, and then you have The
Yeah.
Raid, which champions Indonesian martial arts. I mean, and you can see that we're dealing with very different choreography. We're dealing with very different kind of fighting approaches, paradigms. Is there a distinct aesthetic? Is there a distinct look? You know, if we find a Vietnamese martial arts film or Vietnamese style choreography, would we be able to spot that and go, aha, that's different from Japanese, Chinese, Hong Kong?
Probably yes, if you knew what you were looking for.
Okay.
It would. I'd say it looks like a probably like a mixture of Hong Kong style, like flying kicking, but with some elements of like Thai martial arts. You'll see a lot of elbows, knees, kind of infighting as well. So lots of close range kneeing, elbowing, headbutting, and then distance kind of high flying kicks, this kind of thing.
Okay, and you say that it's, I mean, they're part and parcel of a kind of a creation of a cultural sense of Vietnamese society and history and identity and heritage. Is there any effort to disseminate these styles internationally, or is it just a matter of if a family migrate and they want to teach, then they will? Or, you know, is there much of a Vietnamese martial arts diaspora, you know, or is there a government policy where they try to fund kind of cultural, you know, visits or something like that? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, there are some of the larger organisations do have kind of international training programs. For example, Vo Vietnam, which is the largest and most well-known style of Vietnamese martial arts, they have, I think they have ongoing kind of cultural exchanges and programs in about 20 to 30 countries.
Yeah.
A lot of them are kind of French-speaking nations.
Yeah, I was just going to say that actually. I remember now. I've been to France a few times over the last few years, and every time I've been to France, I've seen a van or a sign which is a Vietnamese martial arts class. Never seen it I've never seen it in Britain. I mean, do you know anything about the status of Vietnamese martial arts in Britain? Have you ever seen any?
Yeah, there are a few groups. There's I think there's quite a large club of a style called Nhat Nam, which is like a really traditional emphasized martial arts. There are also clubs of Vo Vietnam and some other kind of smaller lineages. I don't think there's a large number, to be honest. The predominant schools are based in France, French-speaking countries, and some Russian nations or former kind of Soviet nations as well.
I mean, how are they positioned in the, I hate to say market, but how, you know, if you live in a city somewhere, if you live in Paris or wherever, and you could go to Savat, you could go to Shotokan, you could go to Vietnamese style, you could go to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. What would be the thing that would take you to the Vietnamese club? What would be the flavor or the thing that you couldn't get in the other martial arts, do you think?
Well, I think some of the appeal of the Vietnamese martial arts are kind of the mystery about them. I mean, people don't know much about Vietnam itself, let alone the styles of martial arts. I think for a lot of people that is an intriguing aspect. They're also, because a lot of the martial arts have been used in relatively recent times, there is a certain practicality about them, which I think appeals to some as well. So I mean, you do have aspects of kind of traditionalism, but there's also quite a lot of emphasis on reality and actually having some useful combatives in there as well.
Okay, so if when I was looking through your book, and I was thinking this is quite useful for someone like me who doesn't know anything really apart from some phrases really about Vietnamese martial arts. So this would be a good starting point. So if you read your book to get a sense of the spectrum and the sense of the range, where would be the next stepping stone? I mean, can you just go on YouTube? Can you just Google this stuff and find more information, or would you have to be able to speak and read Vietnamese to get anywhere further than your book? I mean, what other scholarship is out there? What other videos are out there for the English speaker?
I don't think you need to be able to speak any Vietnamese. I mean, especially considering a lot of the teaching, even in Vietnam, is just done with kind of signaling and demonstrations. In my book, I've kind of deliberately included sections that kind of lists appealing aspects or negative aspects of each style, so people could potentially have a look and see what they were interested in. Mm-hmm. For people visiting Vietnam themselves, I've included kind of a list of some of the largest schools that people can drop in and visit. But for many of the styles, I mean, YouTube is a great place to start, or looking for local clubs. I mean, they're kind of relatively few and far between, but there are clubs in almost every nation that you could have a look at. And
as your books, because you sent me it was either you or your publisher sent me a kind of a PDF version of it. It's out now, isn't it? It's published.
So it's out in September 1st.
Ah, so it's not even out yet. So this is kind of like an advert for your book then. Okay. So I was going to ask about the reaction to it, but I don't know. I mean, you have sent it around to a few kind of experts like me, who knows nothing about it, right? But I mean, what has the response been so far? If you've had any, what's been the feedback that you've had?
Yeah. Generally, the response has been really positive. I mean, anyone who has any kind of background knowledge of martial arts or about Vietnam themselves know there's such little out there that's written kind of from a independent standpoint that's not kind of government publicized.
Okay.
So I mean, yeah, generally the response has been really good. I think it's just a good stepping stone for people to learn about the Vietnamese martial arts and continue to see if it's something that interests them, or if they want to learn more, then
so I mean, thinking about this, I'm sure that you must be potentially, or you are about to become kind of really popular with certain Vietnamese institutions and authorities and people who want to promote Vietnamese culture abroad. Have you had any interest, or have you piqued the curiosity of any institutions in and around the Vietnamese state for like your capacity to be an ambassador for Vietnamese culture?
Yeah, well, I have done kind of bits and pieces in the past with some of the larger organisations where I've been invited to like come and view competitions or kind of help with some promotional things. But I mean, that's something that I would like to try and develop more in future. I mean, I've lived in Vietnam for a long time and I've practiced Vietnamese martial arts for a long time, and so I think kind of in my position, it's a good place for me to do that further, and that's something I hope I can do in future.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you about. I mean, I was asked you about a little bit about your past and a little bit. So the present, I guess, is the appearance of this book, because this podcast will go live in early September, I think. So, boom, there you go. There's your plug. There's your advert. So the future, you're currently teaching a bit of martial arts, and you have a kind of sort of sideline in the media, and you might be about to become a cultural ambassador. So what does the future hold? What will you be doing over the next couple of years, do you think?
Okay. Well, my next plans in terms of martial arts are I want to kind of follow up on this book with a look at some more of the surrounding nations' martial arts. I mean, this has been a good kind of starting point for me, but now I'm kind of interested in looking at how nations on the surrounding Vietnam, for example, Cambodia, Thailand, Laos, how these kind of martial arts fit in alongside Vietnamese martial arts in kind of a more global perspective. Mm-hmm. So hopefully I'm going to work on some more written materials. Mm-hmm. Okay. Along with that, I'm continuing kind of training and teaching myself.
Hmm.
I'm also working on some fiction, which is based kind of martial arts themed.
Okay. So you like the idea of a researching and writing career where you publish and you train. I guess then you manage your own time and you can just, well, I'm going training now. I'm not going to work. I'll work later. But that's the brilliant thing about being a writer, isn't it? You can organize it around your own thing. And then maybe the media career as well. I guess you haven't got a huge amount of control over that, but you're interested in that as well, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, like you said, I mean, having the chance to kind of travel to different places, train martial arts, write about it, photo them. I mean, that's kind of something
Yeah.
I want to pursue further.
Yeah, living the dream, living the dream.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, Augustus, it has been great talking to you. It's great to meet you, and the internet connection didn't let us down this time.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for taking the time. This will probably go live in September, which is when people can buy your new book on the martial arts of Vietnam. So Augustus, thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks for having me.